Hey, it's JUCK. I'm a believer that this team's going to win the national championship. Something stupid is coming out of his mouth. I don't know. Maybe it's just my age. He needs his vote pulled immediately. And of course, yes, a season like this has to have a name. Let's talk about something good about Justin Freck. What are you doing? Season of dreams. Ohio State, my guys, are either the best or the second best program in the history of college football.
Let's get it.
And welcome into JUCK on Champs on a Thursday. Appreciate you so much for joining me. I said, look, the show is called JUCK on Champs today, okay? And it'll be JUCK on Champs for a little while until further notice when it might change to JUCK on Sooners. We'll see. I did say about 2 weeks ago when I did a little bashing of a certain publication that started this Jim Knowles to Oklahoma. They didn't start it. It came from message boards, but they first publicized it and put it into the public eye. The first reputable journalist, reputable media outlet that put out the Jim Knowles to Oklahoma stuff. And they admitted in the story that there was nothing there other than Oklahoma would be interested. And of course they would. Everybody would. Have you seen what Ohio State's defense finished this year? Let's go over that right quick, shall we? Ohio State's defense 2024 finished number one in scoring defense, number one in total defense, number one in total yards allowed per play, number one in total touchdowns allowed per game, number one in opponents' total touchdowns scored in the red zone, number two in sack yards, number two in tackles for loss, number two in total sacks, number two in passing touchdowns allowed per game, number two in opponent red zone scoring percentage, number two in opponent red zone touchdown percentage, number three in rushing defense, number three in passing defense, and number three in sacks per game. The guy who orchestrated that, yeah, everybody's going to want him, of course. But those guys, heard some message board stuff, and it became a thing in Oklahoma. And they did some digging, talked to some sources, and admitted in their article just how clear in its infancy this was, which is code for, yeah, we got nothing at all on this yet other than, sure, Oklahoma would want him. And I did a show and I said that no reputable journalist has put out a report of anything about Jim Knowles in Oklahoma. Like, there's nothing there yet. Doesn't mean it won't happen, though I listed off all the reasons why I don't think it'd happen. And I said, if it does, here's where I went a little out over my skis. I would change the name of the show to JUCK on Sooners for a week and post an Oklahoma flag behind me. Now, I maybe shouldn't have said that. I maybe got a little out over my skis with this because I was irritated. And I was irritated because that's our guy. You're trying to poach our guy, number one. But really they weren't at the moment, as far as we knew. But some Oklahoma reporters have said today what I said, which is no reputable journalist has said anything about it, which was the premise of what I said there. Now, those Oklahoma fans, they attacked me hard for saying that no reputable journalist or media outlet has said there has been anything. There is nothing here yet that is known by anybody. It's all speculation. And they came out and said that. Now, I'm curious to see if they're going to get attacked. But it is notable that the wife does, or the girlfriend or the fiance, she does live there. She does have teenage kids. It's been said she doesn't want to move. That all may be true. And that could certainly be a pull. It is also notable that Knowles did not flat out deny it. Though he did say in that same setting, when asked about CJ Hicks, he didn't quite know. He wanted to, the way he wanted to use him this year, he knows how to use him next year. He did say that. Now, that would insinuate that he's going to be in Columbus next year. Oklahoma has not hired a defensive coordinator. You would think at this point in this cycle, they would have by now. That could be wishful thinking. Who knows? But if any one of these coaches off of this staff end up leaving, with all this going on, it just might be Knowles. It just might be. Now, I'm hedging a little bit. I still don't think it's going to happen. But at the risk of looking like a total moron, I'm not going to dig my heels in and say it's not going to happen. Because once I found out that it was actually true and not just message board fodder, that the fiance actually does live in Oklahoma, which I was very suspect at first, but I did get confirmation that that's true. Well, you guys know how it is. I've seen a picture of her. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes things have more importance than your career. Obviously, from a football standpoint, from a career standpoint, this would be, of course not. No, you're not going to do that. It would make no sense at all. But he is just a man after all. So who knows? But now that we are through a season with the 12-team playoff, we've got meetings coming up. The Big Ten and the SEC and their brass are meeting here in a couple of weeks. And those two are walking in lockstep. They're meeting for the second time together, and they're going to meet a week before all of the college commissioners meet together. And I bet all those other college commissioners just can't stand this. Big Ten and the SEC get together a week before we all get together so they can get on the same message and decide exactly what they want to come push to the rest of the college football commissioners about what they want to see change and where they want this playoff to go in the future. Now, we know that the seeding is jacked up, and we know that that's not going to change for the next playoff we see, because it's written in the contract or the deal that every single commissioner needs to agree if they change it before this 2-year period. And we know that, for one, the Big 12, and they're not going to agree, right? Like, they just got to buy out of Arizona State. So they're not going to agree to something that would hurt them. So that's not going to change this year. It'll surely change in 26 when they can just be outvoted when they come to the new deal. So we'll see that change. We also know that undoubtedly we're going to 14, potentially 16. And if the next step is to go to 14, it's going to be most likely formatted with 4 automatic bids to the Big Ten, 4 automatic bids to the SEC, 2 automatic bids to the ACC, 2 automatic bids to the Big 12, 1 automatic bid to the G5, and 1 at-large bid. So from that point on, guaranteed 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC teams. And if the Big Ten is guaranteed 4 teams, you can pretty much say Ohio State's in the playoffs every year from now till eternity. Things would have to really change in the last 120 years of program history drastically for Ohio State not to be in that 9.8 out of 10 years. Coincidentally, this year, they just barely made it in that format, the 4th place Big Ten team, which, boy, I'm being reminded of that constantly. Let me tell you something. So we talk about this playoff, and I was not for this playoff. Didn't want it. Didn't want anything to do with it. Not because I didn't think the playoff experience would be awesome. And it was awesome, though I wonder how my view would be. And I'll have to wait and see for a year when Ohio State doesn't make a run. I don't know what I would have felt watching this just as a college football fan. I think I would have loved it, but I'm certainly skewed because I didn't just go through watching my team win the national championship throughout this playoff and being really excited for the next game each round. But I went through what you went through, I think, like the most exciting period of our Ohio State football lives. So naturally, when we look at this playoff, we're going to feel great about it. So I'm trying to be objective as I can. There are some things that I don't think were great about it, being objective. But I was not for this playoff because of what I thought it would do to the regular season for me. Not for anybody else, but for me. And for me, I thought that the big upsets that used to be season ending, which in essence made the entire regular season a playoff in its own, you lose a game, you're out. And I'd knock you off the list. My Buckeyes keep going on. Oklahoma lost to Baylor. They're out. And that's That's how I did it. And that's what I loved. And I lived for those Saturdays when we would get one of those big upsets and a big team would fall. And that to me was exhilarating every single week. And I did not want to trade off losing that for this tournament at the end, even though I knew that this tournament in a 12-team format would benefit the team I love. The team I love, most likely always going to make it into an expanded playoff format. But I didn't want it to ruin that regular season that I love so much. So after seeing one full year of it, this particular year, I was wrong. And I was wrong because those big upsets not only felt huge to me when we watched, for instance, Notre Dame lose to NIU or Georgia head into Austin as an underdog and just defensively annihilate Texas, and all the other big upsets we watched throughout the year. They felt hugely consequential at the time, even though they weren't technically playoff eliminators. They didn't end those teams' season, but they felt huge. Now, that's how it felt this year. I knew, of course, and you knew, of course, that these teams weren't eliminated when they lost. And I worry now about next year, what it's like when we see those big upsets now that the general public and the talking heads realize. I don't know how they couldn't have had the foresight to realize it ahead of time. But now that they realize, when we see a big upset, and we'll hear it nonstop next year. Whenever we see an upset, we're going to hear Notre Dame lost to NIU and played in the national championship. Ohio State lost to Oregon and Michigan as a 20-point favorite and won the national championship. It doesn't matter. And what worries me is when that starts to spread, it doesn't matter and gets repeated over and over and over again. That is when it becomes reality. When it sets into the general public, just like we've talked about before with bowl games, when the meaningless game got repeated over and over and over again, then it started to not matter, and then they became meaningless. We used to just be able to suit up and play a football game, and it had meaning because it was a football game and everything was at stake, your program, your pride. Now they're, quote, meaningless, and I can't stand that, but that is what it is, and it only is what it is because public perception changed, because people hear things and it sets in. So I'm worried slightly next year in the regular season that when we see those upsets and we start to hear that regurgitation, that it will take value away from that. This could be me just worrying for no reason, but it is a potential pitfall. It always was, of expanding the playoff, is devaluing some of the regular season. And I think we saw a lot of that by the way people talked about the game this year. And the Buckeyes lost the game and they won the national championship. And some people have had a difficult time with this. I had a difficult time with the loss of the game and a difficult time with losing the rivalry this year. I don't have a hard time squaring that Ohio State won the national championship with the fact that they lost the game. The last national championship we won, we lost to a poor Virginia Tech team. Like, you're going to lose games sometimes and win the national championship. More times than not, the national champion loses a game. It doesn't mean anything to me. In the end, the Buckeyes went through the roughest run we've ever seen. I was happy they got that draw, and they annihilated the field and won the national championship. And it means no less to me at all. I still am furious about the game, and the opponent still has that to hang over our heads. They do. That's true. And I've got no problem with them bragging about that. They should. We would. No problem. Go ahead. But here is the issue I have, is now we are seeing things like this. Let me pull this picture up here for you. Seeing things like this. You got the diagram here. You got Ohio State 2024 right in the middle. Up top, did not win conference championship. Up Georgia and Ohio State 24. Over here, lost to unranked opponent, Ohio State and Clemson 2016. and Ohio State 24. Lost to rival 2017 Alabama and Ohio State 24. So the insinuation here is that Ohio State 2024 is the least worthy national champion ever, right? That's the insinuation. That was the headline of the graph. And being someone who was against the expansion of the playoff, I understood that I was on an island. I was on my own. I didn't want this thing expanded. And even those of you who are, generally agree with a lot of the things I say, and I hear from you guys in the comments, and I appreciate those comments. Even those of you who agree with me on most things disagree with me on that. And you said so in a nice way. And I understood it ahead of time. I got that I was one of the few. I would say maybe 15% of college football fans didn't want this thing expanded. That's just a guess. I have seen some polling, but they're not scientific poll. Large college football accounts did polls on it. It felt like about 15 to 20% liked things the way they were and wanted them to stay the same. So I knew I was on an island with that. So when I see all the hate Ohio State's getting right now for what happened in the regular season and making this playoff and then winning the national championship, that somehow this team was unworthy of winning a national championship because in the previous system that nobody wanted, they didn't want that system anymore, they wouldn't have won the national championship. So you can't actively say and push for this new system that includes 12 teams, and then the first time it's over, say, it doesn't count. That team wouldn't have made it in the last system. You didn't want the last system, you morons. Not you, the ones who are knocking this championship. Of course, not you. So that burns me, but the rival keeps wanting to point that out. The same ones who told us to cope for the last 12 months. Well, they can keep on coping. This is the system that they wanted. And if they were too stupid to realize that 2 and 3 loss teams, the benefactor was always going to be teams like Alabama and Ohio State who slipped up, but clearly had the talent to go on and win it all. Well, you get what you paid for. You wanted this. I didn't ask for this, but I knew that it would benefit the team I root for more than any. Look back at the last 20. Ohio State wins 11 games every year. Every year. We look at so many teams in Ohio State's history that may have been able to make a run like this. It was always going to benefit Ohio State. So these are the rules. I didn't ask for them. We play by them. I still am happy that Ohio State got to make that run, the toughest run you could ever see. And it'll be a long time before we see a team beat 6 of the top 8 teams in the country. A long time. In Ohio State, one of those top 8 teams. So 6 out of 7 of the top 8 teams in the country. But when we look at the postseason, out of all the matchups, the favorite won all but one time. All but one time. And I think a lot of people wanted to see some upsets, some March Madness style upsets and teams going on a run that you wouldn't assume. And we just didn't get that at all. And I don't think we will, because football isn't like basketball. Football isn't like basketball. There's not 5 guys in the starting lineup and one of them can get hot and take over a game. We just don't see upsets much in big time games in college football, because upsets generally happen when a team is overlooking a team, not when 2 teams are playing for the ultimate prize. The favorite usually always wins the championship when you get down to the playoffs. And I don't think this is ever going to be a field in this playoff tournament that has a lot of upsets. Pretty chalky stuff. Ohio State, how ironic is it that Ohio State, we went into the game against Tennessee as a 9-point favorite, in the playoffs at home. Yet our fan base was so mad that we allowed 30,000 opponents into the stadium. It's there's only one place in the country that you could have a scene like that. The 9-point favorite in a home playoff game, a team that was number 2 in the country prior to the previous game, and the fans are so damn angry. When people tell me that rivalry doesn't mean anything, man, or it's meaningless, or it has less meaning, yeah, okay. Let me explain what just happened to you over losing that game. But as we look back, I feel like one thing that I would definitely like to change, we've now seen the ratings come out for this game, and we're talking about Ohio State and Notre Dame, the 2 biggest fan bases, storied programs. And I know maybe a lot of people didn't think it would be much of a game, and a lot of people thought Ohio State would run away with it. But the viewership for this national championship game didn't reach my expectations. Viewership came out, it was 22 million. And last year's national championship between Michigan and Washington, Michigan, obviously the second biggest fan base in the country, in Washington, a peanut who was having a great season. And maybe some people thought that they could upset Michigan because of the offense they played and the big win against Texas they had previous. It beat this year's national championship game. They got 25 million. Ohio State and Notre Dame get 22. And I think that this is the product of how long this playoff drug on. And this is where I'm trying to take a step back and pretend like my team's not in it. It just seemed to go on for a long period of time. When we look at the end result here, and we're doing episodes, talking about the game, and I had to check the days when I was doing the episode the other day, just kind of calling back how long of a period it was from the game to the national championship. I mean, it's a pretty long time. And that's not great, because so many people and fans of college football, their season for their team has been over for such a long time now. By the time the national championship rolls around, I mean, they're into talking about poaching other people's coaches and real far into the next year and what they're talking about. And there's still football going on. And I think it took away. So how do you change that? For one, the 10 days between games, I think, needs to go. I think that in between rounds, taking the 10 days is a bit much. It extended it way too long. So there's a way to shave those days. Obviously, the stupid conference championship games would be another way, but unless they find a way to tie those in, I don't think we'll get rid of those. But that's one complaint I think I would have, just as a college football fan. It drug on too long. It did drug on too. I mean, just by the numbers, I think the viewership numbers prove that, because I can't square that in any other way other than you got a favorite and people think no, Ohio State's going to run away with it. That can take some interest down. But other than that, with those 2 fan bases, those 2 national brands, international brands, that it would be lower than last year's. Though the Michigan team did have a lot of interest to it for, a lot of reasons. One, they have a huge fan base. 2, a whole lot of people rooting against them too. So there was a lot of interest in that one for sure. But they'll try to dunk on us for that one. No doubt about it. That'll come. That'll come as well. They're coping hard, guys. They're in a bad spot. They're not the only ones. Now, keep in mind, the Oregon fans that hang around here, I like. So when I talk bad about Oregon, I'm not talking about you guys. You guys are great. In fact, look at this comment here. I want to read this comment to you. I truly feel like the Buckeyes are the next Bama with Saban. Ohio State is such a great school. Loved going to the Rose Bowl and loved the Ohio State traditions from the team to the band to the fans. Go Ducks. So that's one of our Oregon listeners that hangs around here. And you can see they're respectful. They're cool. They like the Ohio State tradition. They like being part of the Big Ten. They're not out here talking crap. But there are some Oregon fans that are having a real rough time. They're having a real rough time like fella here, man, he's been on a heater. You may not like to hear this, but Oregon still has the best record in college football. And he's right. They do have the best record in college football. In fact, they're the only team at the end of the year that has one loss. And speaking about the new system, when we look at the top 10 here at the end of the year, this is the system everybody wanted. This is the way this looks at the end. Look at these. The fourth place team finished with 3 losses and everybody else after them. Look at all these 3-loss teams in the top 10. Now, this is obviously a result of now all the good teams are going to make the playoff, and they otherwise would have just made a bowl game and put another win on the board. Everybody's losing now their final game except the champion when you make the playoffs. But a whole lot of 3-loss teams at the end. And Oregon does still have the best record. So congratulations. I hope that makes you feel good. But this guy also wants to add that Oregon has as many national titles in track and field and cross country as Ohio State does in all sports. Now that's pathetic. That is pathetic. It's wrong too, but really pathetic. Ohio State has more national titles in synchronized swimming than Oregon does in track and field and cross country. Courtesy Kevin Harris, who's a good follow on Twitter. But some other news here today. We've got obviously the Jim Knowles rumors. Now, that came from the Oklahoma rumor boards, but the guy that asked him that question, the question that he answered in a very push the question off kind of way about Oklahoma at the press conference before the national championship game, Jim Knowles said, just coaching my guys, basically. Focusing on Notre Dame. Didn't really specifically answer the question. Brandon Marcello was the one who asked that question. He's from 24/7. Now, when we think of clickbaity stuff, we think of On3. And On3 does this a lot with recruiting. Post a lot of clickbaity headlines, ask a lot of questions to get answers like this and headline it in a way that it's the way they roll. I get it. All I really care about with those sites is how I view their recruiting rankings. But On3 has come up in the world. They're doing much better with that. And that's all I care. But they do have that reputation at On3 for being kind of clickbaity. Now, it was Brandon Marcello from 247 who asked Knowles that question. And now we're hearing a lot of rumors about Carnell Tate entering the transfer portal. Now, similar to Knowles, there are not a lot of reasons you could think of from a football aspect that would make Carnell Tate be interested in the transfer portal. He had another successful season. He looks like a first-round draft pick. I can definitely see the irritation he might have that maybe he thought he was going to be the next dude, and JJ comes in. That can suck. That can hurt somebody's ego. I get it. But he is a dude. That's for sure. We all know it. And he could be a number 1 dude just about anywhere. When you think about it like that, maybe you could see he might want to go somewhere. But then when you think about NFL development and productivity, being the dude opposite Jeremiah Smith really gives you one hell of an opportunity to showcase being that dude and just how good he is, because we saw him start to get his respect nationally this year. But I still think a lot of people talked about him like, oh, yeah, and he's really good too. But they didn't really understand quite how good he is. And next year, he gets to showcase that. And he's going to tear it up because he is and always was the next Ohio State first-round receiver. And I said it this year when Jeremiah came in, like, this is not a Carnell Tate, who I view to be Ohio State's next first-round wide receiver. This is Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson. And maybe Carnell Tate doesn't want to play with that. That's the only thing I could think of. But we're hearing these rumors of Carnell Tate transferring because Carnell Tate was asked by Brad Crawford after the national championship. Brad Crawford. And I'm really disappointed. This is 2024's JUCK on Bucks College Football Journalist of the Year. Brad Crawford is, by the way. And he asked Carnell Tate after the national championship game about the transfer portal. Now, why would you do that? I don't know. It seems like you're just trying to kick up. And this is what he tweeted about asking him that. He tweeted, I asked Ohio State wide receiver Carnell Tate about the transfer portal after the game. He smiled and said, I'm just going to celebrate with my team. Now, I asked Ohio State wide receiver Carnell Tate about the transfer portal after the game. How did he answer? His response was, I'm just going to celebrate with my team. If Brad Crawford wasn't trying to kick up, he would have said, he answered, I'm just going to celebrate with my team. He didn't. That's not what he did. He said he smiled and then said, I'm going to celebrate with my team. Now, when you add on, he smiled and then said, I'm just going to celebrate with my team, you add context to there. And me as the reader, I read that and said, oh, and that's what he wanted. And that's what he got. And I think that 24/7 is seeing a little success from On3 with their clickbaity stuff and trying to maybe pivot into this. Carnell Tate and the transfer portal. That's where it started if you're hearing it. And if you read that and think that there's anything more to it other than a journalist trying to kick up stuff, well, that's all it is. Nothing to it. Absolutely nothing to it. And if there is something to it, it is what it is. The wide receiver crew at Ohio State, do you feel any less comfortable with Mylan Graham stepping up or Bryson Rogers is a dude, man. BI catching more balls. I don't. That said, from a football standpoint, Carnell Tate going to benefit a ton next year if he sticks around. I don't think there's anything to this at all. And I'm just bringing that up. If you are someone who is hearing it, that particular comment irks me. And I think he was just trying to kick up the news, and it's a little bothersome. Say, guys, let's like the video. How about we do that right now? And I want to let you know that we are at the official count 9,835 subscribers. We are down to 7 days till we get to the 1 year mark at JUCK on Bucks. So close to that 10,000 mark. If you could subscribe for me, I'd appreciate it. We're really trying to get there. It's going to be a race to the finish, guys. It's going to be a race to the finish. I don't know if we'll make it, but it'd be pretty cool if we did. Also, if you are someone who wants to commemorate the national championship with a sweet Buckeyes helmet of your own, a black one, a regular one, whatever kind you want, a mini one, check out Green Gridiron, link in my description. The new sponsor here at JUCK on Bucks. These guys are awesome. There is like 16 different options for every team you could ever want. And you should start your helmet collection today. Nothing is more satisfying than walking into a room every day surrounded by football helmets. I promise you, once you try it, you won't be able to get enough. And you can get them all at Green Gridiron, sponsor JUCK on Bucks. So shout out to them. But so now that the college football season is over, one thing that we're going to see a lot of for the next month are rankings. Way too early top 25, best games of the playoffs, best bowl games, best matchups of the upcoming season, best coaches. We're going to see a lot of this for the next month. And I stumbled across a list that I found interesting the other day. And this is from The Athletic. And this is, I never thought of this. We can do this now. The best players from the college football playoff. We had plenty of games. Who made their all college football playoff list? We'll start with the offensive MVP, Will Howard. 75.2% completion percentage throughout the playoffs. Staggeringly good. 1,150 yards. 8 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions. And in the championship game, he was responsible for 18 of 21 first downs for the champs, 8 of those on the ground, and we were waiting for that all year. At running back, they have Nick Singleton of Penn State. In 3 games, he compiled 261 yards and 5 touchdowns. That dude's a stud. He's coming back to Penn State, who makes at least one person's list for the number 1 team entering into next season because of what they got coming back. I don't know. We'll have to think about that, guys. Tell me what you think about Penn State as the number 1 team entering next year. The other running back is a tie. and they have Quinn and Trey as a tie for the other running back. Their yards, Trey had 265 in the playoffs. Quinn had 255. Trey had 5 touchdowns. Quinn had 7 touchdowns in the playoffs. So there's your backs. Nick Singleton in the Buckeye combo. At wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith is the first one, and they go on to say it's not hyperbolic to suggest Jeremiah Smith is the most impactful freshman, non-quarterback, in the last 40 years. In 4 playoff games, Jeremiah Smith caught 19 passes, 381 yards, 5 touchdowns, and no defense could contain him in single coverage. That Smith has 2 more years remaining is astounding and terrifying for Big Ten defenses. That's for sure. The second wide receiver, Jaden Greathouse from Notre Dame. That dude's definitely got some potential to be a stud. Tight end, of course, that's Tyler Warren of Penn State. He is not one of the Penn State returning players, unfortunately for them. Offensive line, our first offensive lineman, Donovan Jackson, maybe the MVP of this Buckeyes season. I mean, really, when we talk about value, I think there are a lot of things you could take off this Ohio State team, and it still could have done what they did. I don't know if you could have removed Donovan Jackson, and it could. Matter of fact, I'm sure of it. I'm sure that if Donovan Jackson wasn't on this team, you can't do what you did this year. You just can't. You can talk about you could have gone a different route in the transfer portal and brought in a different quarterback, and maybe he could have done what Will did. Maybe you didn't add the luxury piece of Caleb Downs, and the Buckeyes still could have done what they did. You didn't add Quinshawn, they still could have done what they did. There's just no way, if you didn't have Donovan Jackson on this team, that they could have done what they did. I just don't believe it could have happened. So, Donovan Jackson, a legend. That's a Buckeye legend right there now. He is. Kelvin Banks also makes the list from Texas for offensive linemen, as does Emil Wagner, Ohioan, plays for Notre Dame, Charles Jagusaw from Notre Dame, and Jake Majors from Texas. Their all-purpose offensive player, Cam Scadaboo from Arizona State. That dude's a beast. Too bad for ASU. He's out of there. Defense. Their defensive player of the year, or of the college football playoff, number 1, the dude, JT. 6.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 23 total tackles. He was an animal in the playoffs. He was the guy in this playoffs that was the dude we thought we may get for most of his career. Coming out of high school, I thought that guy was going to be just an absolute animal. And he was that animal in these playoffs. He was everywhere, run game, pass game. He was unstoppable, even with an injury. Also on defensive line, you've got Denai Dennis Sutton from Penn State. He's coming back. And then you've got Jack Sawyer, who had 4.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups against Oregon, and obviously the play of the postseason against Texas, one of the best plays in Ohio State history, that still does not have an appropriate name to my knowledge. They also add Vernon Brighton from Texas. At linebacker, Cody Simon, 38 tackles, including 6.5 for loss and 3.5 sacks. Cody was outstanding this postseason. He was outstanding all year. A captain, a real feel-good story coming back year 5 after, not nearly getting enough run last year and didn't get enough snaps, even though he got about 370 snaps to Steele and Tommy had about 650 apiece. But James Laurinaitis said he probably should have played him more. And he definitely should have played him more when we look at how poor at times the linebacker play was last year. But Cody probably wasn't as good, but he was damn good. And seeing him come back for his final year, become a captain, get the block O, the guy deserved it all. And he played like it too. Fantastic player, fantastic Buckeye. The second linebacker on their list is Sonny Styles, ending up with 24 tackles and a pair of sacks in the final 2 games. They say that Texas was by far his best game. I disagree. At safety, Xavier Watts for Notre Dame, total stud. Loved watching him in the national championship game, picking up Trey, and they go up for that kind of jump ball. It was an ill-advised throw. They both made a great play, and they showed some mutual respect afterwards. I thought it was really cool. I like Xavier Watts. Caleb Downs, obviously the other safety. Caleb Downs, the best player on the defensive side of the ball entering college football next year, without a doubt. What an addition. What a player. And he's going to be a guy that when we look at the defense next year, and we just went over the depth chart, having him there just provides so much calm with me when we look at so many new starters. You got that guy, things are good. He sets the tone. He leads by example. He's just a pro. He's an absolute pro as a 19-year-old kid. It's pretty wild, but he's that dude, and obviously the best safety of the postseason. At cornerback, Jahdae Barron from Texas and Leonard Moore from Notre Dame. And that's quite a story there, Leonard Moore. Their all-purpose guy, Abdul Carter from Penn State, who, again, unfortunately for Penn State, not one of the returning guys. So, interesting list there. And out of the top 100 players on ESPN's list for the top 100 players of the season, 10 Ohio State Buckeyes make the list, which is fitting because the class of 2021 had 11 top 100 players. So, bada bing, bada boom. All right, guys, that's our show today. I appreciate you all so much. Please like and subscribe on your way out the door, and I'll talk to you soon. Juck on Bucks out. Hey, it's Juck.
Juck? Who is Juck?
Juck on Bucks.
Juck on Bucks. Juck on Bucks.
Juck.
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 Juck on Bucks.
My guy, Juck.
Juck on Bucks.
My buddy Juck.
Juck is the Juck.
It's Juck on Bucks.
Okay. Juck is junk.
The Juck eyes.
The Juck eyes.
Juck on Bucks.
Junk. Juck. Not junk. Juck.